Board. There we go. So over to you, Ben.
Right, is that all set to go, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, cool. So tonight, well, thank you firstly for having me on. Nice to meet you all, albeit virtually. I spoke to Derek about potential sort of flies I could do. We decided on some grayling nymphs. Works for the season. I know a few of you guys fish for grayling, so hopefully you can copy a few of these and catch the fish over the season. The hook and device is a Partridge SLJ. It's a size 14, but this fly I'll tie 14s down to 20s. So it's just like a generic sort of tag nymph that I've been doing quite well on this year. What I'll do is when I finish, I'll post pictures, sort of closer up pictures of the flies, and then give you a material list as well if you want to have a go at them afterwards.
Magic.
So thread is just bog standard 8/0 black uni, and just start behind the bead there. So the tag on this one, generally I'll tie tags with glow bright floss, but recently I've been messing about with some different materials for tags to try and create some different effects. So what I've actually found quite good success with is Fritz, and using Fritz for tags. So it's this particular Fritz is from Uphaven. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of it, but they've got some really nice stuff coming out at the moment. And it's a slightly different Fritz to your standard gel core. So it's not your sort of your classic sort of plasticky Fritz. It's quite a nice, almost floss or yarn that's been turned into Fritz. So it's very, very soft, and it holds the color really well. And you can achieve colors that you wouldn't normally be able to dye. So I've used this for the tag, and it's actually worked really quite well. So it's kind of like a pinky coral color. And it's really started, the last couple of trips I've had out for the grayling, it's really picked out the better fish, which is quite interesting. So I think it's a color that they don't often see, because as I say, it's not something you can achieve with your standard glow brights or other flosses. So all I've done is I've gone from the core, as you can see, and I just pinch it and just pull off a few fibers like so, and then work them together until you can create sort of, I don't know, 8 or 9 fibers. They're quite thin, and just tie that in as you would normally. So again, as I said, because this Fritz, it's not, I can't really call it a Fritz. The only reason I call it a Fritz is because obviously it's bound like one, but it's a completely different consistency to your standard gel core styles. But as I say, it just comes out really, really nicely. It's really easy to use, and I say nice and soft. So just tie that in and tie that up to the top there, and snip off the bits from the sides. Now with my tags, I'm quite OCD with my fly boxes, so all the tags have to be exactly the same length. All the flies have to be perfectly matched, you know, same number of each, etc. So what I like to do to keep the consistency is I use the back bend of the hook to snip off. So if you run your scissor behind the back end of the hook, hold the tag and then snip, it gives you a consistent tag every single time, and it just looks much better in my opinion. Obviously OCD, but you don't have to do that, but it's a nice little way of keeping them all nice and tidy. I do this with glow bright as well as this Fritz, because it kind of buffs out the tail a little bit better. So I just take a dubbing brush and just brush it out, and what you find is it just opens it out a little bit more. It gets any of those strag or stray fibers, and you snip it off like so. The rib is just a standard small silver wire, and what I like to do with slot beads is I like to put the wire inside the slot there. It just keeps it nice and neat out of the way. And what you find is if you have it hanging at any other point on the fly, what can often happen is obviously with, not necessarily with dubbing bodies, but if you have a quill or a thread body, it creates notches or slips. You don't have a super neat body. And the same again, if you're tying like a CDC hackle, if you have a notch by the bead, it can sometimes slip. So I like to stick it in there, keeps it tidy, it keeps it out of the way. I'm just going to tie that in like so. Is that all clear for you guys? You see this nicely?
No.
Yeah, if you can keep touching the hook, it'll refocus on it.
That's
Okay.
it. Oh, brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So the next material I'm using is the body. So it's like using sort of hare's ear plus. Can you see that? Is that?
Oh yeah, Yanshiman.
Yeah. So you've got Yansaman. Really nice stuff. It's UV fibers mixed in. I often will mix my own dubbings. I quite like the combinations I can create, but this one in particular I really like because it's got the perfect balance of dubbing to UV enhancement, and it's a really nice blend. So it's not too much, but it's just enough so you can see it on the fly without it being garish. So I'm going to create a thin dubbing rope with that, and just wrap it over as you would touching turns, nice and slim. We don't want a big body, but you do want a little bit extra because you want to brush it out and make it quite a nice buggy look to the fly. And then we just bring the rib in standard turns, 4 or 5, that'll do, and just tie that off. Now, as I'm sure most of you will know, wire is the biggest culprit for blunting your scissors. So if you just hold and wiggle, it'll just snap off like so. And that means you get to look after your scissors and they last a little bit longer. And then obviously, as I mentioned, the buggy look, just take your dubbing brush again and just brush it out. And the nice thing about this is it will pull out all of those little flecks of UV. So if you don't do this, what will happen is the UV will get stuck around the rest of the dubbing on the body, and it just takes a little bit. Because it's a little bit stiffer than the actual hare's ear. It's a little bit more difficult to pull it out of the wire. So when a fish takes it, it takes quite a lot of fish to really bring out that buggy look. So I like to give it a head start and just pull a few of those out to begin with. You get a really nice buggy look to the fly. Now, when you're tying CDC hackles, what you'll often find is it will go one of two ways. It'll either cloak really nicely and have that perfect teardrop shape, which is what you always want, or you'll have a really, really slim CDC hackle that will hug the body of the fly. And that's not what you want, because you want to have the fly with the maximum amount of movement possible. So what I do to counteract that is a tip I picked up from a very, very good fly fisherman a few months ago. It's Scott Nellens. And he puts a very, very small, but very, very tightly wound amount of dubbing just directly behind the bead. Now, what that does is when you tie that CDC loop in and you tie that hackle around, this really, really tight ball of dubbing forces that CDC to open up, because then it can't squish. So when it's wet and in the water, all that CDC has got amazing movement in the water because it's not tied down tight to the body. Now, as you all know, CDC and clips, just pop it in like so, nice and simple. There's 2 ways you can do the CDC hackles. You can either do a dubbing loop, so whereby you create a loop like so, spin it, and then use a dubbing spinner. I think that's realistically that's more sensible when you're tying bigger flies, streamers, things like that, with a lot of fur or a lot of feathers that you want to create quite a big profile. If you're just doing small flies like this, a split thread technique is much more efficient, and I think it's just much easier. Really, there's a lot less faff. So split the thread with a needle, and just going to pop that CDC in there like so, and pull it so it's about a millimetre or so from the end of the thread. And now what I do is, when I'm spinning my CDC, what can often happen is, if you've got quite flat thread like this one, if you have your thread vertical or your bobbin vertical when you spin it, what will often happen is some of those fibers will fall out because it's quite loose, because obviously it's quite a flat thread. So I hold it at a 90-degree angle like so, and you can already see it's starting to twist a little bit. And what this means is I have a little bit more tension than I would normally if it was vertical. Now, as my bobbin is then spinning, I slowly lower that down, and you'll see it immediately start to tighten up. Now, what that means, you don't lose any CDC, nothing falls out, and it all stays in nice and neatly, like so. It just means that you don't then have to use another feather or another piece to try and achieve that same hackle. So what I'm going to do, touching turns up to the bead, like so. And now, really important thing here, I've unspun my thread. So certainly with 8/0 threads, 12/0s, smaller threads, what will happen is when you spin them, they tighten and they become more fragile. So if you then start doing tighter turns after that hackle's turned in, what will happen is your thread is likely to snap because it's got a lot of resistance and it's become more brittle where it's been spun. So I'll do a couple of turns just to tie it off, and then I'll unspin my thread so it's nice and flat again, and that way it's less likely to snap. I say that it will probably snap in a second when I go and tie this off, but the general idea is there. So obviously this is a small fly, it's got a very, very long hackle. So I want to shorten this down. With CDC, obviously you can use your scissors or you can use your thumbnail. I don't do either of those because I think it gives you too much of a clean break. I don't want a clean break. I want it to be nice and natural, nice and buggy, almost inconsistent in the different lengths. Not by much, but just enough so it looks normal. So what I do is I pull all the fibers back and I pinch it with my right hand, and then I, like you would with marabou, I just pinch and pull. I pinch and pull. And as you can see, you've got your fibers at all slightly different lengths, similar, but not perfectly cut straight as you'd achieve with scissors. And what that does is it just gives you, again, whether it matters to the fish, probably not, but to me, I quite like that small detail that makes it a little bit more buggy. For the thorax, so we could use the same UV plus, but I quite like my thoraxes to have something slightly different to the rest of the fly. Still going with the black theme, but I got a bit of Hen Spectra 45. Really, really nice sort of copper peacock kind of color. It's just going to break up, add another extra small element of flash without being too gaudy. Obviously, the key trigger point on this fly is that coral tag. But I do quite like to have small elements of flash alongside it. So in different light conditions, that UV is going to pop, in another light condition, this thorax is going to pop a little bit better. So it just gives you an additional details for the fly. And again, simple as that. Couple of turns. You don't want too much on the thorax. That's quite important. You don't want to make it too bulky. Just a small amount to cover that CDC. And then just a classic whip finish. So I sometimes use super glue or varnish, but general rule of thumb, I'll just do a double whip finish on my river nymphs and then pull it inside the bead, and then just use scissors and snip. And again, to get that buggy look, I'm just going to tease a few of those fibers out, and you can see how, if you can see it super clearly, but you see how the thorax is blended in with the body, which is then blended in with the CDC and the tag as well. So that whole fly has now come together, and different angles that you look at it, you're going to catch different elements of the fly. So maybe get a bit of UV, a little bit of flash, and obviously the tag at the back. So it all incorporates into the one pattern, but every element has its own purpose. It's just a really, really good fly that's been doing really well for me this season. Again, I'll tie this 14s down to 20s, and the smaller the fly gets, the smaller I'll make the tag. So on the 20s, I have a very, very, very small tag, maybe just a touch, maybe a millimeter or a millimeter and a little bit off the back, because that's going to be for spookier fish. A small tag is perfect for spooky fish because it has that trigger point, but it's not too much. So that's the first one.
Have you got a name for it, Ben?
I don't, unfortunately. I literally created this about, well, probably a month or two ago, and I've used it a few times, but haven't had a chance. So I'll leave that to you guys. You're like the first people that have seen it, so
like a red tag variant, isn't it?
Yeah, like almost like a coral tag, I suppose. But yeah, it's a good little fly. The next one, I'm going to do something slightly different. So what I'm going to do is I've got 3 tag nymphs and 2 shrimps, because I think that's pretty much all you need when it comes to grayling fishing. Is a couple of nymphs and a couple of shrimps. That's kind of your main port of call when you're fishing for grayling. That's kind of their main diet. So this fly I was shown a couple of years ago, actually, and it's just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal fly. It's probably the closest representation I've ever seen to a natural freshwater shrimp in terms of profile, colour, and all round just fish catching ability, I suppose. It's beyond effective. So I use this for grayling, I use it for trout, I use it for stockies, everything. It is just phenomenally effective. So the hook in the vise is a size 14, just a grub hook. And again, I'll tie these down to 20s. So obviously your natural shrimps will go smaller than that, but that's about as small as I can go without throwing it across the room with frustration. Bit of flat lead is what I use for the weight. So this is from Hens, it's a 0.2. I don't think it matters. You can use round lead if you want to. I quite like flat. I do prefer, you can get a sticky back lead. That's really, really good. But I've run out, so I'm just using the standard. Excuse me, having a sip of tea. So what I'll do with this is, the thing with the lead, it adds weight, but it also creates the profile of the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it over the opposite side and then wind it up. And then for 14, my base is usually about 5 turns. And then I'm just going to use my thumb, my nail, just to push and then break. And then what I'll do with the ends is I just like to use my thumb. What you'll find with the lead is when you wrap it around the hook, you obviously get the ends like so, and they're going to poke out and they're going to catch a thread. And then what you'll find is when you're tying your thread on, I'm sure most of you guys have had this tying shrimps, it will start to unravel your lead underneath it if it catches. So what I do is just use my nail and I just flatten those ends off and I push them further around the hook. They sort of almost mold into the hook itself. And that's just a really easy way of just keeping it nice and flat with no ends that are going to catch. So that's my first layer. Now with a shrimp, obviously, they're slightly thicker in the middle. That's their general profile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come about 1.5 turns up, and then I'm going to put 3 more turns in like so. And you can start to see this shape forming in the middle here. So what I've done is I started a little bit in and I finished a little bit in from the front. So it's creating that sort of slightly more bulbous center. Now, with the thread, I've got a Textream in a light brown. It's just a really nice color. I don't think this matters particularly. You could use an olive or a gray or a white or whatever. But this is just happens to be the one that I use and I've got confidence in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the thread out the eye, and I'm just going to do open turns nice and gently around the lead. And what that'll do is it just captures it all in. So it won't slip, it won't fall, it's just going to hold there like so. And then when I've come off the end here, so now on the bare hook, and then I come back with slightly tighter turns to lock it all in, like so. Now that's in like that, I'm just going to take another same piece of lead, work out where I finished was about here. So I'm going to come a little bit further back again. And again, this is really accentuated that profile, and just a small amount right in the center to really force that profile of that sort of raised center that you'll see on the natural shrimps. Now with lead, the beauty of it is it's quite a supple material, so it's easy to cut and break. The only issue with it on the top like this is if you try and wiggle it or bend it or cut it with your scissors, it's more likely to slip either side of the fly, and then you've got to keep going until it works. So what I like to do is hold my thread with a little bit of tension and then just gently wiggle. And what that will do is it will cut it dead flat, and then it will sort of mold back into there like so. And what that means is you haven't got to worry about it slipping or moving or falling. And the thread cuts it, so you haven't got to get your scissors involved. Again, like wire, lead will blunt your scissors. And what I've done there is I've just put a few thread wraps just to tie it up a little bit. And then I'm going to come towards the front. In terms of the rib, so on this one, I quite like a clear rib. You can use wires, you can use the thread if you want to. I think this is a bit stropped, it's just a bit standard. What was that? 3.5 pound, 4 pound probably. Nothing special, just standard what I have left over. You get a small piece of that. I like to use a clear leader for a lot of my shrimp ribs. I think especially with this one, if you're trying to keep it as natural as possible, the clear rib adds to that kind of jelly-like texture, whereas a wire rib, for example, wouldn't look as natural. So what I'm doing with that is I'm going to start it right at the eye. Now the important piece of this is you can, with obviously your lead, where you've created that taper, you can build that back up with thread to make it smooth. That will take time. It also wastes thread. If you tie the leader in at the front and you hold it right on the top of the fly, what it does is it creates that cover for you. So it enhances the shape further, but it also helps to cover up those bits of lead that previously your thread wasn't quite thick enough to cover in a single turn. So again, it's adding to the structure, but it's also covering the lead. Yansaman again, just a nice magic shrimp fall. It's a really nice color. It's a light brown. I've played around a lot with this fly over the last sort of couple of years, and this is what I found to be my most effective. It's not the original. The original, I couldn't get my hands on the stuff for it, but I don't think it matters particularly because it works very, very well. As you'll always find with nymph skin, you'll have a shiny side and you'll have a matte side. Now with this one, I like to have the shiny side down. I want the matte side facing upwards. So when I tied it, just going to put a little triangle. And the triangle obviously helps the tape when you're tying it in, and it catches in better. And because I want the shiny side facing down when I pull it over, I'm going to have the shiny side facing up when I tie it in. So again, catch it by the eye and bring it up like so. And then put it, so as you're coming over, so I should explain that better probably. I have it quite tense when I tie it in. I reduce the tension as I come to the middle. Again, it's adding to that taper. And as I come towards the end again, I increase the tension on the shell back there. And what that will do is it will again add to that same taper, that same shape. And that's all we want to do with the shrimp. It's the most important part of the shrimp is having that correct shape. I'm just going to fill in a little bit of thread at the front here because it's not quite the shape I want it to be. There we go, perfect. Now, and then obviously the reason why you pull it tighter at the end, it makes it smaller. You keep the end of the fly smaller. Small detail, as most of you know with freshwater shrimps, they have little parasites which are bright orange. You can achieve this with dubbings. You can achieve this with thread hotspots, or beads. There's a multitude of different things you can do. What I really like, and what I'm sort of copying the original in terms of this one, is I've got some medium orange holographic tinsel. And you'll see why I like this in a second when I finish the fly. It's quite a subtle color. I say subtle, it doesn't look very subtle. But when I actually tie the dubbing and I tie the rest of the fly, you'll see actually how this is only a a soft amount of flash. So if you think about, you could use something like a thread or a glow bright. I see used quite a lot, number 5 or number 4. The only problem with those is they're very, very bright. So if you're fishing for spooky or finicky fish, a very, very bright hotspot can sometimes put them off. Just doing 2 turns of that right in the center. Obviously, the smaller the fly, less turns. So if I go down 16 or lower, it's just a single turn. If there's 14, 2 turns is perfect. Now, at the moment, that looks quite bright and quite flashy. But as I say, once I start putting dubbing over it, you'll see the key difference with what it will achieve. So it's this very, very soft color when it's finished off. The dubbing, I think, is probably the most important element of this fly. This one is a scud dub. It's like an olive grey color. It's the closest I can find to the natural freshwater shrimp when it's wet. And again, the fly is very successful. And if it's not broken, don't fix it, as the old saying goes. Is there better out on the market? I'm sure there is, but this works for me, so I'm just going to keep it going as is. With the dubbing rope on this one, again, it's the same premise as I've had with the lead, as I've had with the thread wraps. You want to follow your dubbing in the same shape as a fly. So if I show you my rope here, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
It's got starts quite slim. It's going to build up again a little bit thicker as you get towards the middle of the fly, and then it's going to slim down again as I get towards the head. And again, this whole process was all about maintaining that shape of the shrimp. So the first couple of turns, and just start working that up. Again, the nice thing about this thread is it's quite a similar color to the dubbing. So when it comes through, it doesn't affect it too much, doesn't change the color of the fly too much, which I think is really nice. Come to the hot spot, and again, all you're going to do is you're going to go over it with the dubbing. And you can, I don't know if you can see it on the clarity of the footage, but you can just about see that orange. And that's the most important thing. If you use, I've seen a lot of people using tungsten beads, like an orange tungsten bead for hot spots. Again, you can use the glow brights. But what you find with those, is that, as I mentioned earlier, is they're too bright and they're too much. With that, it's not only covered by the dubbing, but you'll see later when I finish the fly, when it's wet, it only just comes through. So it's very, very subtle, but it's just enough to give the correct impression to the fish. So as you can see, the shape is exactly as I want it. You've got a slim base, a slightly thicker center, and slim towards the front again. And now you're going to bring that shell back over, like so. Try and keep it centrally, and just pull it tight there. And then I'm just going to wrap that over like so. Just a couple of turns. Now, what I see a lot of people doing is at this point, they'll pull this tight and they'll snip it. And the amount of times I've done that and it's just pinged the other way and I've got to start the fly all over again. Don't do that. Leave it on there, because you might find as you're tying the rib up, you want to change the shape, or it slips or anything like that. Just leave it out here. It's not going to do anything, it's not in the way, but it just means that if anything does go wrong, you want to retie the body, you've still got a nice piece there. So with shrimp ribs, what I like to do is I'll do one turn on the bare hook. That just locks that rib in and has a good strong base for that first turn. Now, when I make that first turn, because of the angle of the hook is coming down, it's very, very likely to slip. So what I do is I put my finger on the end, and that just holds it in place, and I bring it through like so. And then I bring that second turn in. And then once you have that second turn, you can then carry on as you would. But by just holding that with your finger, it means that it doesn't slip off the back of the hook, and you can continue nice and easily up the rest of the fly. Open turns, just nicely segmenting that body, and then just tied off like so with a couple of turns there. And then snip your waist piece. And as I said before, all you're going to do with the shellback is pull it tight and then snip it. I seldom snip it in one. Again, OCD, I like a very neat head. So I actually snip it in 3 parts, like so. And what that bit, basically, you don't have to do that obviously, but I just sort of snip as I go around. It gives you a very, very small, tidy head. It makes no difference to the fish. Again, it's just like a personal preference for me. And I'm gonna come in with a whip finish on this one, like so. And with this one, I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on the head, just to make it nice and strong. And what I will do as well with the super glue is I put a little dab on the top of the head, and I also cover the span flex as well. But when I cover that shell back, I go back to that final turn of leader, the final turn of rib. And what that does, that just holds that rib in place a little bit better. And stops that rib from slipping. So what you'll often find is if a rib's going to slip on a shrimp, it'll be that first turn where it's slipped out of the head or it's been moved. So putting the super glue just on that first or that last turn as well, just holds it all in place nice and tidy. And in the true Blue Peter style, here's what I made earlier. If I wet it, you can see, I don't know if you can see it that well, but you see that orange just pops through when it's wet quite nicely there.
Yeah.
And you can see how natural, it's almost like a jelly-like consistency. And it's the absolute carbon copy in terms of color and shape of a natural shrimp. And as I said, that orange is so subtle, but it's there, which you can't achieve with a glow bright or a bead. It's very, very subtle, but just enough. Yeah, that's that one. Again, great little pattern. Next one.
And can I just ask?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask? Do you ever flatten the lead to make it a flat shape?
You can do. I don't tend to worry really. A lot of people do. So a lot of people get a pair of pliers, but if you can see it here, and they'll squeeze the sides. Again, it's personal preference really. I've never found it makes a huge difference. I think because I use flat lead, it tends to have that slimmer profile. If you're using a round lead, then yes, I would, because what the round lead will do is it bulks it up a lot quicker. So I actually would if I was using a round lead, but for a flat lead, I've never really found that it builds too much of a thick body shape. It generally sits quite nicely. But you can do if you want to. I know some people like to do that because it can sink quicker because it's slimmer. It will cut through the water better. Again, not something I've ever really tinkered with, but if that's personal preference, then go for it. Yeah, it's as I say, not something I've done before, but I do know people that do it and swear by it. So if that's your prerogative, then go with it. Next fly. So I did say I was going to do 3 tags. First one was a Fritz tag. The next one is a dubbing tag, and the last one will be your classic glow bright tag. So this is a fly. I don't know if any of you have heard of Craig McDonald, but he's a phenomenal river angler from Scotland. I follow a lot of his stuff, and he ties some really, really nice flies. And I shamelessly stole this one from him. It's a phenomenally effective fly. It works for trout and grayling. This is again a super simple fly to tie, really, but just slightly different to your classics. It's just the incorporation of certain materials together. So, where, for instance, your standard rib on a nymph might be a wire or a single color of glow bright. What Craig does is he likes to incorporate different colors of glow bright together, and it gives, again, like the pure blood tag, just colors that the fish don't see very often, and it's those small margins that make a massive difference to the fishing. So the hook and the vise, again, it's just a size 14 jig hook, and it's got a 3.5 mil pink bead. As I say, I'll tie these down to 20s. I like small flies. I think they work very, very well for spooky fish and sight fishing, but you can tie bigger in 12s or 14s, whatever you fancy.
What bead would you put on a 20 then?
Sorry?
What bead would you put on a 20?
Probably a 2 mil.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 mil or a 1.5 mil, depending on what you want to do. So my general rule of thumb is something that I don't know if you've heard of Ben Bangham, but he's a good friend of mine. And he taught me many, many years ago a really good system for bead sizes. So general rule of thumb is a 14, I'll put a 3.5. A 16, I'll put a 3. An 18, 2.5, and a 20, a 2.5. Sorry, a 20, a 2 mil bead. And that's kind of my general rule of thumb for all of my grayling flies and trout flies as well. Obviously, sometimes you want to have a different size bead on different hooks, but if you're just tying a couple of standard patterns, that's probably your best bet in terms of sizes. Thread is just red, same text stream as earlier. It's just quite a nice thread, really. Nothing else really to say about it. It's they're a new one on the market, I think, the last couple of years, but just do really, really good threads. Snip off your waist piece. Now, as I mentioned, 3 different tags, 3 different materials. So this is angel hair. It's a dubbing, but it's quite a long fiber dubbing. So it's designed for sort of bait fish patterns, lures, things like that. But obviously you can then incorporate it as a standard dubbing, or as Craig uses it, as a tag. So just take a pinch like so, and then tie that in. Not too much, but just enough. Bring it up to the front there. I'm just going to fold that back and tie it in like so. And again, like I did before, using the back of that hook just to snip that off, nice and neat and tidy. So you can see the difference between that one and the fly I heard earlier in terms of color. So this is a floss tag or similar. Very, very bright, very, very garish. This one's quite a soft, nice violet dubbing. So it's really, really light in color. It has a little bit of flash, but it's not as garish as the other fly. So for spookier fish or fish that have kind of seen a few different flies, it's a really, really nice pattern to put in front of them that shouldn't put them off. As I mentioned at the start of this fly, he incorporates 2 glow bright colors in his rib. So you've got number 1 and number 5. Now it's a thing I've been doing for a while now, which I picked obviously up from Craig, and you can combine all kinds of different colors. So glow bright 11, I think it's 11 and 12, which is a chartreuse and a green. Those 2 spun together make a really, really nice sort of greeny yellow color that's really good for caddisfly ribs. This is a really nice combination, this sort of pink and red, or pink and orange, and it comes out again a sort of a reddy coral color. The key with this is you're creating colors that, as I said before, the fish haven't really seen before, because you'll find general rule of thumb is anglers kind of all fish the same patterns, the same stuff. If you can incorporate small elements like this to your flies, you can fish the same patterns, but you can adjust a couple of materials and your fly will fish completely differently to the rest of the flies that the fish have seen. And you're just giving yourself that small advantage over the rest of the anglers that are there. So just tied those in. The body on this one is Phasna. It's just a standard squirrel dubbing in natural. In terms of buggy bodies for river nymphs, I don't think you can beat either fox squirrel or pine squirrel. They're absolutely phenomenal. Short, spiky fibers, really, really buggy. I tend to use Phasna more than any others for my pine squirrel. The main reason is it's the only one I found that gets darker when it's wet, and I really, really like that. So a lot of pine squirrel that I bought in the past becomes quite light when it's wet, almost goes like a light beigey color. This goes almost like a dark grey or black, and it looks a lot more. It looks a lot like the nymphs we have in the water, and I found that it fishes better than the lighter alternatives. So that's I'd always go to Phasma for my pine squirrel. Again, small details, but they do make a difference. I know it does sound anal, but it really does. It makes a difference. It makes a change. So standard dubbing rope, nice short body there. And then with the 2 strands, I'm just going to spin it in my hands. And what you can see is that it's a really nice tight, almost thread. The only fiddly part of this fly is you do have to keep spinning it each turn, just to make sure it's really, really tight. And you achieve that gorgeous color. If you don't spin it tight enough, what you'll get is you'll get the 2 strands separating. And when they separate, you don't get that same color effect. It doesn't look as good. Whereas if you look at it here, again, sorry, the camera isn't the best, but it's just a very, very vivid, but different color to your standard. So I could have wrapped, 2 strands of the orange or 2 strands of the pink, and you get that set color, whereas this is just different, and really, really nice. So again, as before with the coral tag, small amount of dubbing, tight behind the bead, because we're going to put a CDC hackle in. And it's just going to force that teardrop shape. And it's going to brush out some of these fibers, make it nice and buggy and scraggy, like so. CDC, same again. Just pull the fibers out 90 degrees and chuck them in a snip, a clip, like so. And then split thread method as I used before, because it's just, again, easier on these smaller flies. One good tip in terms of spinning your thread, if you can't really show it with the camera angle, but I'll describe it as best I can. If you come to spin your thread and you want to split it, the best way to go about it is to understand which way it's already spun. So you'll find your thread will spin in a particular direction, and it'll be quite tight. So what I do is I just leave my thread to dangle, and I just let it sit. And what you'll find is it will slowly move in either clockwise or anti-clockwise, and then you'll know that's the way it wants to go to flatten itself out. So once you understand that, all you do is just spin it further, and I use my dubbing needle like so, just to flatten it. And it's just a quicker way of working out which way your thread wants to spin to flatten out. Again, just a dubbing needle to split it and pop that in there like so. Again, that same 90 degrees, just to stop any fibers from slipping or falling out. And as it gets tighter, slowly lower it, and it will tighten a lot quicker, a lot more effectively, and you won't lose any of those fibers. Pull some of those out like so. There we go, lovely. And then it's going to wrap that and tie that in like so. Right, couple of turns, and again, as before, spin your thread the opposite way to the way you tightened it, because obviously it gets more brittle when it's spun and tightened. So just flattening it out again. And same method as before, just pinch and snap to give that nice, natural looking, uneven CDC hackle. Again, just looks buggier, it looks more natural, and it just looks better, really, to put it simply. Thorax, again, slightly different color. Did the same with the first fly. I like a little bit of spark on my thoraxes, but not too much. So you've got a little bit on the tag, you've got a little bit of trigger point on the rib, and then you can have a little trigger point at thorax as well. But again, it's a natural color, so it's not now too much flash, but just enough. So this is again Spectra from Hens, and it's 239, which is like a nice dark olive, peacock kind of color. I don't think it matters particularly. There's about, I don't know how many thousands of different olives on the market for tubbings. Use whatever you've got. It's literally just 2 turns behind the bead. It really doesn't matter hugely what you use. The difference between this fly and the black one is I want to have a small thread collar. So what I'm going to do, because I quite like the red with the pink bead, I put a little super glue on the thread, like so, just a dab, and then I'm going to whip finish that super glue in. And what that does is it just creates a nice, neat collar on that fly if it picks it up, like so. A nice little bit of red hotspot. So again, multiple elements of that fly have small hotspots. Just a really, really effective pattern. Sparse, it's buggy, but it has little triggers for the fish to hone in on. And again, great grayling, great trout fly. Really, really effective. Yeah, that's that one. Next fly, I'm going to do another shrimp. I don't think you'd call it a grayling fly display or show without having a disco shrimp. I'm sure any of you, the guys on here that fish rivers, certainly for grayling, will have heard of this fly. It's one of Ben Bangham's again. Probably one of the best grayling, I say grayling, one of the best anglers I've ever met, ever fished with. And this is a fly he made many moons ago. It's phenomenal. There's nothing that comes close to touching how good it is for grayling. The amount of fish it takes, it's criminal. It really is. Grayling love it. Trout, you get the odd one, but it is designed as a grayling fly, and it is really, really effective. So there's a lot of variations out there. Different people have their own takes. I really like the original, and I'm very fortunate enough to have a little packet of dubbing made for me by Ben. So it'd be rude not to use it. Same hook and device as before as a 14, but I tie this fly in bigger sizes as well. So I'll tie this fly in 10s, size 10 again down to sort of 18s and 20s. What I've often found is certainly on chalk stream rivers, if fish aren't hugely pressured, a big size 10 disco shrimp can often be incredibly effective. Way bigger than any natural shrimp. To be fair, it doesn't even look like natural shrimp, but grayling love it enough to eat the big ones too. So well worth having some bigger size in your box as well. Again, back with that flat lead, size 14, so around about 5 turns. And I'm just going to use our nail to snip that off, both ends, like so. And then just flatten those edges down. Come back in again, about a turn and a half up. So we're going to do a 5 and a 3. Snip that again. With this fly, you want to make that same profile. Slightly different thread on this one. I've just got a UTC 70 in fluorescent orange. Again, doesn't really matter what thread you use. It just happens to be the one I have to hand. Start again at the eye. And like I did with that first natural shrimp, I'm going to do nice open turns just to tie everything in. A couple of turns on the bare hook, and then bring in some tighter turns like so. And what that does, as I say, is just holds everything together and holds it in that shape. And same as before, come just to the middle there and do a couple of turns. Pull with your thread, wiggle with the lead, and push that in like so. Lovely stuff. Now, for the wire on this one, this does actually make a really big difference, the color of wire you choose for this fly. Why, I have no idea. I'm not the only one that's found this. A lot of people have found the same thing. It makes a huge difference. So this is a leaf green wire from Hens. It's a really nice sort of olivey colour. I don't actually use it for any other pattern aside from this one, but it's really important that you use this particular wire. You could use silver, copper, pink, lime green. It just doesn't work as well as this. Why, I have no idea. I don't think anyone really knows apart from the fish, but this one seems to be the one that they want to go for. So again, as before, just tied it directly over the back of the hook to help with that shape. Now, nymph skin, just bog standard, clear, natural, translucent, 3mm. And again, as before, you have a shiny side and a matte side. Now with this one, again, I don't want the shiny side facing up. Different reason to before. The natural shrimp, I want to keep it natural and drab. This one, you're going to end up putting a permanent marker over the back, and the color will not hold on that shiny side. So again, pull tight, loose in the middle, and then tight again as you come round. And just tie that all in like so. Just going to tidy that up, make sure it's only orange coming through. Like so, lovely. Now, the dubbing. So the dubbing mix, or the original blend, is a mixture of hairline UV shrimp pink, 70%, and then hairline UV calabatis, 30%. You can just use shrimp pink, but the calabatis combined with it just works better. It's just the extra sort of UV grey kind of element that just seems to enhance the fly even more. It is quite possibly the worst dubbing to try and dub. It really just doesn't want to go onto the thread, but it's worth it for a fly that catches a lot of fish. So again, same principle as before.
What colours were they again, Ben?
It's UV shrimp pink, and in fact, I'll get you the original packets out. Yeah, so it's a UV shrimp pink. You see that?
Yeah.
And then UV calabatis.
Thank you.
It's 70% shrimp pink, 30% calabatis. That's the ones that he uses. Again, people have the different variations and styles, but this is the original. And in this case, I like to stick with the original because it's the best one. All I'm going to do is, again, small down at the base, and then as we come towards the middle, it's going to get a little bit more bulbous, and then sparse again as we come to the eye, as we come down. With this one, don't worry if you haven't got perfect thread wraps. It doesn't seem to matter. The Grayling quite like it when it's a bit chewed up and the orange comes through. That's why I quite like the orange thread. But again, you can use whatever you want to. The one thing I have found with dubbed bodies is, especially with lighter color dubbing, the thread you use will come through the dubbing. So for example, if I used a black thread for this olive shrimp, the body would be a lot darker. It wouldn't necessarily be black, it would keep that olive color, but you have a much darker body. Which is why it's quite important I use a lighter brown thread or a white thread or something like that. With this one, again, I use an orange thread because that orange is going to come through that dubbing. Not only does it make the fly brighter, but it's important that it doesn't detract from the dubbing itself. So if you use a black thread or a brown thread for this fly, it would completely change the color of that dubbing. It wouldn't look right as it came through as the fly got chewed up, and it wouldn't work as well. So same as before, pull tight directly over the back and just tie it in like so. A couple of turns just to keep it nice and tidy. And then turn over the back nice open turns all the way up, like so, and then tie it off. And again, as with before, with wires, just wiggle them. What you'll find is when you wiggle your wires, as I'm sure you're all aware, it breaks down underneath the thread. So you don't, if you snip the wire, you get a little notch at the end. It's going to cut your thread. You're going to snap the thread on it, and it's just not going to sit right. Wiggle and break underneath the thread, won't affect the fly at all. And again, my OCD making me cut in sections because it gives a nice and neater head. Small whip finish. Couple of turns. Again, I'm going to super glue this one, so I'm not worried about doing double whip finish. That will work as is. However, the most important part of this fly is this Sharpie. And what I'm going to do with this is a dark brown Sharpie, and I'm just going to cover the back of that shell back. Now, as I mentioned before, you have the two sides of the shell back. You have the shiny side and the matte side. It's really important when you tie this fly that you have the matte side facing up. And that's because the Sharpie will not sit at all on the shiny side. Again, you're going to do it over the head as well. The color will run off the shiny, whereas it will sit better on the matte. And what I'm going to do is just keep going until you get quite a nice dark brown. Keep layering it up, and there you go. You'll see that really nice deep brown color. If that's coming through okay on your end. Again, I'll send you clearer photos of these. Yeah, that's the original disco shrimp. Really, really good fly. And what you will find is the more fish you take, the dubbing is going to pull out the shell back because it's only penned on. It becomes more mottled, and it has a really, really nice effect when it kind of gets eaten a little bit by the fish. So again, that's something to look out for. Is don't worry if that pen starts to come off, because it will work just as well. Obviously, you need to have some sort of pen on it, but it will work obviously consistently through. And yeah, it's a disco shrimp. The last fly, as I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that I'm not going to keep rambling on for too much longer. Another one of Bangham's. Again, as I say, one of the best anglers I've ever met and ever fished with. So I'd be crazy not to pick up a few of his patterns along the way. This one is very, very different to the other flies I've done this evening. And it's called the Pig Doglet. It's a phenomenal pattern. It's something that some of you will see and be traumatized by the fact I fished for Grayling using it. But it's just ridiculously effective. Again, size is 12 to 16 on this one. I don't go too small on this one. Very, very bright, very, very flashy fly. But it's phenomenally effective in deep winter. So I had a day last weekend, and I stopped counting the amount of fish this one took. So it's a really, really good fly, especially for fish that haven't been pressured too much. Obviously, if fish are very, very pressured, they won't be hugely susceptible to a pattern like this. But it's a really, really good fly. So picking the device, again, size 14, 3.5mm bead. And I've just got some pink 8/0 thread. So start behind the bead as so, and just tie that in like so, and snip it off. Now the tag on this one is Glow Bright number 2. It's a nice soft pink color. So earlier I used number 1, quite a nice dark fuchsia pink. Number 2 is a nice soft pale pink. I prefer the pale pink on this one. I think it looks nicer. Again, you'll see later on the fly has a lot of extra attraction in the collar. So I think in terms of a tag, you can get away with having it a little bit softer color. And again, this is Bangham's original, so just keep to it as close to the vision as I can. What I did is I doubled it over and then doubled it over again. So I have 4 strands That's my general rule of thumb for glow bright is 4 strands. You can use more, you can use less, but I find 4 is usually a good amount. And again, tie that in. So as mentioned before, 3 different materials for tags, shows the versatility of them. Play around. You've got so many options out there. And then again, just snip using the back of the hook, and just gonna brush that a little bit, just fluff it out. The wire for the rib is just going to be a copper, bog standard, nothing special. The wire on this particular pattern really doesn't matter at all because you're not really going to see the body. You'll understand why in a minute, but it's going to tie that in like so. Body on this. So the original I think was a hare's ear. I've really got into using a possum dubbing. So it's Australian possum. It's a really nice, it's similar color to hare's ear, but it's, I don't know why, I prefer it. I find that when you buy hare's ear from companies, you get quite inconsistent colors. You get dark, you get light, you get guard hairs, you don't. It's a real lucky dip. Possum is much more consistent in its color. It's a nice sort of beigey gray. It looks very, very nice in the water. And I think I use it on most of my hare's ear patterns as well. I call them hare's ears, but they're actually possum. It's a really nice soft dubbing to work with. It dubs well. It looks good when it's wet. And it's a perfect color for most nymphs that I tie. So again, if you guys have any, or if you don't, get your hands on some because it's perfect. It's a really good hare's ear alternative. Readily available from most places and not really used a huge amount. I think it's a shame because it's a really good dubbing. Sparse dubbing rope, again, nothing crazy. And bring the wire through in sort of open turns and cover that over. So wiggle and break. And again, just gonna rule of thumb, just brush it out a little bit, nothing mad, just a little bit. And then that same again, small dubbing ball behind the bead, just forces it all to sit right. Now, you can leave that fly as is and it would take fish. But we're going to go one step further. And if you're a purist, look away now because this is criminal. The hackle on this fly, the thorax, is a mixture of things. So obviously you've seen before how you can do a CDC thorax and then brush some dubbing through. It gets quite a nice effect. It's quite sparse. It gets a little bit of flash, but it's nothing too garish. Ben, when he designed this fly, went another step further. And what he's done is he's combined CDC and dubbing. I don't know if I have the exact dubbing to hand. I do. So whether this is the original or not, I don't know. It's just a pale pink Spectra Pearl Phasma number 19. I don't think it matters hugely, but just a pale pink pearly dubbing. And then what he's done with that is he's stripped CDC feathers and blends them together to make this concoction, which is just a big bundle of CDC and sparkle. Bless you. It's a devastating fly. It looks bonkers when you look at the other patterns that I did for you earlier, but it really does take fish. Again, I'm going to put that in a dubbing loop. You don't want too much of this stuff, just enough to cover, and then just what you want to do is put it in and spread it out like so. And again, spin that through at 90 degrees until it starts to tighten. This is a real culprit for falling out of the split thread. So you've got to make sure it's really, really tight before you start to. You can already see some of the fibers, even though it's tight, are falling out. Another trick with this particular dubbing loop is to make sure that when you place the dubbing in CDC into that split of the thread, you make it nice and sparse, because the dubbing itself doesn't really tend or doesn't spin well. So having it nice and sparse means you get it as tight as possible and then won't slip out when you tie it in. And again with this one, touching turns, bring it all the way to the front and then unspin your thread. Now, this is a very, very garish looking pattern. Loads of flash, loads of color, but the blend of the dubbing and that CDC provides a huge amount of movement, which is a really important part of the fly. And again, with that dubbing brush, we're just going to brush it out as I thought it might do. It's just starting to slip. So just try that again. There we go. That should hold now. There we go. And then just going to brush that out slightly. Yeah, as you can see, very, very, very bright fly. But devastatingly effective for grayling. Not, as I say, not a fly for pressured fish, because it's got a lot of color, a lot of flash, a lot of sparkle. But if you're just having a pleasure day or out for the grayling, they go mad for this pattern. Simple whip finish, bit of super glue, and tie that off. And then again, just come back in with the brush, put everything back, and then just break it off like so. And that's it. Simple as that, but devastatingly effective for grayling. Really, really good fly. And yeah, that's all from me. Thank you very much for sticking with it and listening to me ramble for I'm not sure how long. I hope you enjoyed the flies and learn a bit. And yeah, cheers.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, very
Thank
good.
you, Ben, yeah.
Very good.
Thanks, Ben.
Ben.
Great video.
Good. Few nice
Good.
techniques there.
Turn this around.
There's some good techniques there, Ben.
Yeah, I just thought I'd share a few little bits and bobs that I picked up along the way from some sort of people I've been lucky enough to fish with and tie with. I hope I've sort of shared some things that you guys can take away and have a go with as well.
What was the thread color on that last one?
Just a pink.
Just pink.
Yeah,
Right.
just a light pink. I don't think it matters hugely because obviously you've got such a bright fly with so much going on. I don't think the colour matters too much, but I quite like sort of keeping the pink consistent with the pink. Again, that's just sort of personal preference, but you could use whatever you wanted really. As I say, with a fly that looks like that, it does make a huge amount of difference what's going on with it. But yeah. Any other questions or?
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you.
Good. I'm pleased. Oh, very good.
Gone all quiet again, aren't they?
You warned me they were quiet, but they are exceptionally quiet.
We haven't got Gavin. When Gavin comes on, he talks a lot.
Oh, I love it.
He's always asking questions.
They've either really enjoyed it or it was terrible. And they're just trying to make me.
No, we've enjoyed
Cracking
it.
night. Most enjoyable.
Good. I'm very pleased. Very, very pleased.
Thanks again,
Yeah.
Ben.
You're very welcome. I'll
Thank you,
get some
Ben.
good photos